School Leadership Show. I am Jen David Lang, and I'm here today without Mike. Unfortunately, he's on a plane to a conference, and he would be devastated. He is a big fan of our guest today. But I feel honored to be here with Kelly and Juliet Starrett, two people whose work has helped tens of thousands of people to live more fulfilling and more physically fit lives with less pain. And they have impacted me recently, too. I hope I'll get to that story. They are the authors of a book I'm going to be talking about in the main idea called Built to Move, the 10 Essential Habits to help you move freely and live fully. And Kelly is a doctor of physical therapy. He consults and coaches with all kinds of professional teams, NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, and the US Olympic team. And Juliet is a health and fitness entrepreneur, a former professional athlete, and she founded a nonprofit you're all going to be really interested in called Stand Up Kids. They wrote another best-selling book, Desk Bound. There's so much about them that's amazing. And these esteemed fitness experts are here talking to us educators today. So welcome, Kelly and Juliet.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're so glad you're here. I know everyone is probably asking, why invite two fitness gurus to a podcast for principals and superintendents? But we say all the time on this podcast that the job of an educational leader, it's one of the most difficult jobs out there, long hours, very stressful. Really, the success of a school and students often depends on the role of the leader. So that's a tall bar. And we're losing principals. And the worst thing for a school is to go through cycles of principals who leave because of pain and burnout and just not being able to take it anymore. So yes, I do know a few leaders who get up at 4 a.m. and they get to the gym, but that Herculean effort is a tough model to follow. When I was in schools, I didn't get up at 4 a.m. and go to the gym. And so when I read your book, Built to Move, I saw there is another way for busy school leaders to stay healthy and pain-free. And I was blown away. So so can you tell us, I know that you work with really professional and serious athletes, but obviously you wrote this book for everybody. So could you tell us why you wrote this book and how you were hoping to help regular people like me whose jobs are demanding?
Sure. I mean, I think we could probably both take a crack at this, but I'll start a little bit. There are a lot of things that informed the writing of this book and the why. But for this audience in particular, I think one of the things that they'll be able to relate to is even though we live squarely in the health and fitness space and we spend, some of our time consulting with the greatest athletes and trying to make them better, or, we work with a lot of teams and coaches, and that's been our focus. We also, overlaying on that, we are two parents who've been raising two kids and putting them through school. And we live in a lovely community where, we have this amazing community where we've become friends with, the parents of our kids' friends. And, we're very involved in our school district. And it's just this really tight-knit community, but we've become the node in our community. And what I mean by that is that we're the people that people go to if, they throw out their back, or if they're interested in trying a new diet, or if they're wondering what kind of exercise they should do, or how much, or when, or what they should be eating. And, we're happy to dole out that information, to our friends and local community and neighbors. But what we saw in that community was a real desire for people to be healthy and feel good in their bodies and be out of pain, but also a ton of confusion. I think what we've done in the health and fitness space is just fire hose people with all this information. Much of it is way too technical for kind of the average person who has a busy job raising kids and wants to just feel good in their body. And a lot of it is unrelatable. I mean, again, if you're a busy principal getting up at, you need to be at the office by 7:30 in the morning, you're not going to relate to the fitness professionals who tell you to wake up and, spend an hour in your sauna and journal and meditate and do all these things that for kind of, regular people, including principals, are totally out of reach. And so we realized that we could take the lessons and the, the sort of learnings we had in working with the most elite athletes and teams and coaches and figure out how we could transmute those to everyday people like our neighbors. And we wanted to be able to have, when someone came knocking on the door and said, hey, how should I eat? Should I intermittent fast or do the keto diet or paleo diet? Or I just threw out my back. We wanted to be able to say, here's a single resource where you can get all of this information. And we specifically wanted to make it separate from exercise. And I'll let Kelly sort of add his motivations, but I think that was a big part of it, is how could we make a relatable, accessible book to busy people who are busy working professionals raising kids who really feel time crunched. And, by way of reference, before I turn it over to Kelly, we don't exercise, even though we're in the health and fitness space. We're not like exercising all day and meal prepping and, chopping vegetables. Like we do what most people do. We're in front of our computers the vast majority of our day. And so we've really thought long and hard, and Kelly can talk more about this, about how do you fit in these healthy habits into a crazy busy life where you're raising kids, driving them to sports practice, having a demanding job.
I'm very excited to hear what Kelly has to say, because that's so far what you've said. That's exactly it. We need to find ways to help principals by not adding more to their plate, but perhaps changing the makeup of their day, their plate. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Kelly. Yeah.
No, imagine we were in front of the Marine Aviation's Weapons Tactical School, which is a large school full of lots of people. And one of the things we said to them was, hey, sleep more. And then how many people got more than 6 hours of sleep? And very few hands went up. The average was somewhere between 4 and 5. And what we realized is there are times where it's impossible for us to manage all of the seemingly very disparate and disconnected aspects of our health practices because of the demands. And frankly, school leadership is not any different than being a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And that's actually how we talk with our principals. And we're always sort of in awe of the number of stakeholders, the number of shareholders that person is sort of always sort of beholden to: the students, the staff, the community at writ large. These leaders in our community who are, heads of school are really, really extraordinary people. But what we find oftentimes is that if, as you said, if we go ahead and lay over more complex solutions into a very busy schedule, what ends up happening is none of it gets done. And so what we started to do originally many years ago when we started working with this Marine Corps group was start to look at when and where do people have agency and control. And what we started with this assumption, and this is very much part of the book, is showing people where they may have more leverage and more time to engage in a health behavior that over time really does aggregate into mass amounts of change. So we pretend, for example, that if in the morning you have a little bit of control, and that means that we really need to focus on a few key behaviors before you leave the house. And once you leave the house, your day may be shot until you get back to the house. And it may just be a sprint. And in that sprint, you're going to drink some water and try to eat a protein and a fruit and keep moving your body and, get a little sunshine for a second until you get back to the home in the evening. That may be the spot. So what that does is that really helps us to categorize and show people where they can actually engage in essential behaviors that actually build robustness in the system. When we're working with high-level teams, one of the things that we always talk about is session cost. How can we reduce the cost of the day's events, the day's training, the day's leadership, the day's activities? And what we always find is that there's always a cost to that psychologic CNS output, that high verbal, all those meetings, all those difficult conversations. And what we realize is that, you can get home at the end of the day after being a leader and literally just be exhausted, a shell. And what you're looking for is self-soothing techniques. I need to feel better because I'm going to have to do this tomorrow. Yeah. So what we're always engaged in is if we say, hey, it's playing in Major League Soccer, it's playing in Major League Rugby, we want to take those sessions, those events, and see if we can minimize the cost on the person so the person can actually engage in higher amounts of work the next day. They can recover from that activity. So now substitute sport with, I am the CEO of a school and the CEO of a school district. How might we then say engage in the same sets of behaviors that help us reduce those session costs so that we can show up for our families, we can show up for ourselves, and then we're not just ghosts at the end of the day, at the end of the week, because that really is sort of the case. We're basically burning through our brightest, most talented, most motivated people, and they are very cerebral, very top down in their approach, very high emotional IQ, high EQ. And so what we're finding is that if we start with some bottom up approaches and we give those things time to work, let's make sure you're moving your body enough, you're engaged in some different kinds of movement, that you're taking care of the body, then what we see is that the brain is actually capable of a lot more. And let me sum up by just saying, you think you're working at the limits of your capacity, but you're working at the limits of your ability to manage that current capacity. And if you begin to engage in some behaviors like some downregulation at night, if you start to think differently about protecting your sleep, what you'll find is that you can actually work more effectively, work longer and harder, and still show up for yourself and your family with better reserves.
I love all of your messages, and I think the principals and superintendents will too. I think you're talking about working smarter, not harder, not adding those hours. So I appreciate that. And I'll just share my little anecdote. And I'm not a principal in a school right now. I don't even work in a school. And I got some debilitating pain in my back in December and spent 6 months. I went to PT. I was religious 5 to 6 mornings a week. Doing those stretches didn't help. After months, I tried everything: heating pads, TENS units, chiropractor, I tried everything. And then I picked up your book, and it sounds like I'm selling your book, I guess. But and I just want to share 2 adaptive changes, which is what leaders will understand, that I made in my life. One is, I thought the whole goal was for me to get back to like 1 hour of exercise a day, but you all made me think of the other 23 hours. So I hope you're going to talk about that and how to incorporate movement into my whole day. And in fact, I'm standing here recording this podcast. Every other podcast I've been sitting. This is my first, and I will stand from now on. And then the second thing is changing my mindset. So rather than seeing, the elevator's broken, or I left my bag in the other room, as a burden, I looked at movement as an opportunity. And I even unloading my dishwasher as an opportunity. I just moved my daughter into her new home in New Orleans, and I carried extra stuff. I tried to look at it as an opportunity. And so Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit, says that one of the most effective ways to change your habit is to change your identity. So my new identity is as a lover of movement, and I really am feeling better. So thank you for that. And let's get into it. So you wrote this book called Built to Move. Can you talk a bit about the title? Like, how are humans evolutionarily, how were we built to move versus how we're moving in 2023?
Well, again, I think we could probably both take a crack at this. And first of all, I love your story. And I just want to say, like, I'm so glad that is what you were able to take away from the book, because really that's what the goal was. The goal was to really help people rethink this 1 hour of exercise idea and really
focus
a
modern construct.
Yeah. And it's a modern construct. And I think because it's been so ingrained in people that there's often this idea that, well, I couldn't get in my 1 hour of exercise. I couldn't get into my exercise class, so I'm not going to do anything. And I think we've really tried to help people change their mindset that everything in the aggregate really does help. Any small movements, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it's all just money in the bank, so to speak, from a movement perspective. But, I think, when I think about the title, one of the things that has really inspired us is reading and learning more about the blue zones, which are those 5 or 6 places on Earth, if people haven't heard of them, where there are the greatest number of centenarians and people live the longest with, the fewest, the least amount of, morbidity and mortality. And, they follow some pretty simple practices, but on the movement piece, what you'll see in those communities is nobody is strapping on their tennis shoes and going to yoga or going to Orange Theory or going to CrossFit. They have all set up their environments to promote movement throughout their days. They walk to get their groceries. They, most of them have a garden. They're just being very physical throughout their day. And it turns out that amount of just daily movement, moving a lot, is enough. And I want to make the caveat that, Kelly and I are fans of exercise. We come from the exercise world. We love exercising. We love to lift weights. We mountain bike. We do all this stuff. But what we've really seen, especially by researching the blue zones, is that actually it's about the total amount of movement we're getting, and that alone can be enough. And that, it sounds silly to repeat it, but really our bodies are built to move. And I'm sure someone listening to this is going to say, okay, great. Well, all the people in the blue zones are like farmers, and I'm a principal going to an office. Like, how's that going to fit into my life? And what I can say is there are ways, and we really hope we've laid it out in this book, to really rethink your environment to promote more movement in small ways throughout your day.
There's a couple of things that I think we should point on, is that One is that in this book, we try to create vital signs, actual benchmarks for us to understand what our sort of movement minimums, behavioral minimums, and because this book isn't just about movement. It's about a set of behaviors that help support the body, from making sure we're getting enough micronutrients and protein, getting enough sleep, right? Things like that. And simultaneously, we also have some range of motion and physical benchmarks. And what's nice about having a vital sign is it allows us to say, hey, it's not good or bad, but hey, I'm a red or I'm a yellow or a green here. And that, wow, I've noticed because of my current workload that my step count is very, very low. And one of the things that we started, for example, as Juliet's hinting at, is we know how tightly coupled these behaviors are. So if you don't move enough during the day, and what we find is that a person who is sort of unintentional tends to move about 2,000 to 3,000 steps. And your phone already has a step count built in. So it's really easy that basically all the third graders in your school already have a step counter built in, right? And
hopefully not third grade.
I know I'm just being very facetious, but also realist. What we find is when we start to see people move towards something that looks like 8,000 steps a day, we start to see decreases in all-cause mortality. We start to see 50% decreases in morbidity. We really start to get the lion's share of movement. Now, that's all well and good, but it turns out that some of these things that start to happen where I start to accumulate enough non-exercise activity fatigue that I feel tired and I feel more sleep pressure, so I want to go to bed. We also know that, for example, that your lymphatic system, which is the sewage system of your body, everyone makes about 3 to 4 liters of lymphatic fluid a day. All the proteins, all the broken down sort of cells that have, deconstructed themselves, all the waste from exercise, all that comes out through your lymphatic system, not your circulatory system. And that system is bootstrapped into your muscles. And so it's a mechanical pumping of the movement of the muscles that actually flushes the sewers. And so suddenly we start to see, well, if I walk, I might have to engage in going outside and seeing sunlight and being in nature. And there are a whole lot of interesting things that start to aggregate around a simple idea of, hey, I need to move a little bit more. The other thing that I think is really important here is that we're also not just saying that all movement is good. We love any exercise that you want to do. But if all you do is walk around and sit, you're using 2 or 3 words out of the incredible lexicon of the human being. And so if you don't put your arms over your head, if you don't sit on the ground, if you don't kind of move towards some of these end ranges, if you don't express taking a big breath once in a while, you'll see that your body is very much a game of use it or lose it. So part of what we're trying to do is expand the movement language into our sort of natural sort of full alphabet. And if we have access to that, suddenly we start to see that it gives us more movement choice. We feel better, and we stop reinforcing and practicing, right? Because, repetition is the key to adult learning. We don't just practice a couple movement behaviors. We're engaging in lots of different movement behaviors that do things like maintain how well I put my arms over my head or how well my shoulders work. So it's important that we're beginning to understand that if I can begin to think differently about this, and I'll give you an example. One of the easiest ways to do this would be to sit on the ground tonight when you get home. So you listen to this, and all I want you to do tonight when you watch TV and you're chilling out or checking your email is just sit on the floor for 30 minutes. You can sit in any position, crisscross applesauce. If you work with elementary school kids, go sit on the ground with them. You can work all that in. You'll have to get up and down off the ground. You'll find that, wow, my hips are stiff. And if we start to just do this behavior where I'm sitting on the ground in the evening, I can start to rewild and renormalize a lot of my native ranges, which I may have taken my eye off of because I haven't used them day to day.
I love that, of rewilding your normal ranges. And and I think, when you mentioned sitting on the floor, those kinds of things, I think you also mentioned how new the chair is in terms of the history of humankind. And that sitting on the floor is probably what we all did, and finding ways to go back to that state, being outside, sitting on the floor, walking is better for the body. It's more natural. It's where we were supposed to be. So you mentioned a lot of benefits, getting rid of lymphatic waste, living longer, like in the blue zones, feeling better, developing, a wider range of how our body is used to moving.
For me, it's burning more calories so I can eat more ice cream. I mean, whatever your motivation is, it's fine.
Yeah. Any other benefits to outline before we go into a few of these? There were so many.
Man, I mean, I think the one that cannot be stated more fully is, we are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And, this is even among people who go to work and are around people all day, still reporting, feeling extreme loneliness and isolation. And, one of the things that I like to say is that human beings do two things together. We eat together and we move together. Mm-hmm. And, I'll start with the eating piece. One of my criticisms of diet culture and a lot of the diets that people choose to follow is they often pull people away from being able to eat with their friends and family, which is such a critical part of connecting as humans. So, to me, that would always be a red flag. And look, at some point, if you want to change your body composition, you do have to look at food quantity, and there are lots of different ways to do that. So I'm not opposed to, employing some of those strategies for a specific goal, but it would always be a red flag for me if you have, you can't sit for family dinner because you can't eat food that your family's eating. I mean, to me, that's a problem. But then, secondarily, we move together as humans. And one of the best and easiest ways to do that is to walk with your friends and family and, take your dog for a walk in the evening. Kelly and I have a habit of doing a 20-minute post-dinner walk. It helps us digest our food a little bit. We walk to the end of our street and back. We've calculated it. It's like 1,750 steps. We interact with our neighbors. We have a chance to connect with one another without our phones. We can sort of recap our days, see how our kids, check in on how our kids are doing, say hello to Steve, our neighbor that we don't get along with, but is good for us to interact with. There's just so many ways in which sort of stepping outside the doors of our house or our office and moving about our community a little bit wherever it's safe can just really be such an important part of creating community and combating loneliness and isolation, which is, a real scourge in our communities these days.
Great. I love it. Well, I want to get into some of the practices. The book is organized with 10 vital signs and 10 assessments. I'm going to try to get into 4. If I can only get 3, okay, you'll read the rest later. The first one, and I've chosen them specifically for principles, except for the first one, which I just thought we should start from the beginning. So do you want to talk to us about vital sign number 1, getting up and down off the floor, just briefly?
Sure. I mean, Kelly talked a little bit about sort of the importance of it, just in terms of the 30 minutes sitting on the floor. But, we start the book with something called the sit and rise test, which was developed by a group of Brazilian researchers, and I think it was 2017. They published the results of the study that showed that being able to get up and down off the floor without using putting a knee down or using your hands was correlated with living longer and feeling better in your body. And so, we wanted to start with this test because we're known as the mobility people. It's kind of like how we got our start in the health and fitness business is helping people feel better in their bodies through mobility and, range of motion, flexibility type of exercises. And this test is so important because anybody can do it. It's really fun to do with your kids. It would be great to see principals doing it with their whole schools, with their staffs. You just need to do it in a safe place where you can get up and down off the ground. If you have concerns or you're older, you can practice a test going down onto a coffee table or a chair first before you, delve into going all the way down off the floor. But for principals working in schools, you'll all see that kids can all do this without problem. Once you start to get into middle school, though, some of them do start to lose that ability, right? But elementary school kids, by and large, can do this test, and it's fun to do. And what it gives you is just some really basic information about your hip range of motion. And the reason that that's important is that, the number one reason that people end up in nursing homes is they fall and can't get up. And interestingly, the number one reason that young people end up in the younger people, so this isn't just for old people, younger people end up in the ER is from falling. And so we believe that you get so many benefits from this practice of just seeing if you can get up and down off the ground. And then the other beauty of this test is you can improve even for the stiffest among us. Oh, so the test is you stand in sort of an open area, ideally maybe like with a little carpet or something. You cross your legs and you under control, lower yourself to the ground without putting a knee or a hand down. And then you do that in reverse. You try to stand back up from a crisscross applesauce position without putting a hand or a knee down. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I first did this test, I actually couldn't do it. And so even the stiffest among us can get better at it. And what we love about it is the way to get better at it is to actually do it. So that means get up and down off the ground more often and do the simple act of sitting on the ground for 30 minutes a day or longer. What we recommend for our sort of everyday people is, okay, we know you're all watching TV and everybody's doing it. The data is there to show we're all watching some TV every night. So what we've recommended to the average person is spend 30 minutes a day sitting on the ground instead of on your couch while you're watching TV. Or for those people who have the luxury of being able to work from home, maybe choose to sit at your coffee table on the floor for 30 minutes. Principals may have a little bit more sort of physical flexibility in their job. Maybe they can go sit in on a classroom and sit on the floor for 30 minutes. I mean, the sky is the limit, but try sitting on the ground for 30 minutes. That means you've gotten up and down off the ground at least once that day. And you've practiced, sitting on the ground. And again, like Kelly said, the sky is the limit in how you want to sit. Crisscross applesauce, long sit, 90-90. I mean, you choose. And in fact, changing positions often is the best. So we're such fans of this test. It gives you easy information and it's easy to improve.
Let me just jump in and say,
Can I freeze you there?
Yes.
I think there's a couple of others that have huge implications for our principals, but go ahead.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I'm going to move on after you go. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that one of the reasons you should care about your range of motion and what we've been trying to get people to care about how their bodies work, about reclaiming native capacities, how much your knee should come to your chest, how they rotate, is that when we lose access to that range of motion, it often is a component to why we feel stiff and why we have pain. And one of the things that people forget is that when they have pain, that there is something you can do about it. You can ask yourself, is there some aspect of my movement system that I can improve? Can I restore my native capacity back to a baseline? Look, pain can be a very complicated conversation. Pain is a request for change. But one of the changes that we can make is going ahead and working on restoring our ability. So if your back hurts and you're struggling with this test, what you should do is make that connection that your hips may be stiff or you may not have access to these ranges. And subsequently, you're working in a way that your body's asking you for some kind of change. And that may be contributing to why your back hurts.
I love it. It's great. It's simple. I do it every time I get up now from the rug, not the floor, the rug. Great. So a second one, I wanted to jump all the way to vital test number 9, because I think this has a lot of implications for principals in schools. And that one is create a movement-rich environment. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the sitting inventory assessment and what does it mean to create a movement-rich environment? And then I would love if you tell me the story about your daughter's field day and your nonprofit that you founded, Stand Up Kids.
Sure. I think I'll go ahead and talk about a movement-rich environment. I think you've started, even in telling your story about what the changes you've made, I think, you've started to think differently about your environments. And, Kelly and I have worked really hard to create a movement-rich environment, both at our place of work and at our home. And what we mean by that is creating as many opportunities as possible to move without having to think about it. Because man, if you are a tax busy working professional in any profession, principals, included, and teachers, and also raising kids and doing all the things that are crazy, we often really lack willpower and motivation to do one more thing. But if our environment is just set up so that the right decision is easy to make, Kelly likes to use a better decision. Kelly likes to make the analogy, like if we have cookies in the house, he's going to eat cookies, like no one's safe until all the cookies are gone. And so I think if you think the same thing about your movement environment, it really does require a shift. So I'll talk about just some examples of what we do at work and what we do at home that sort of exemplify what we've done anyway to have a movement rich environment. We're talking on this podcast. I'm standing here at a standing table.
I'm perching.
and
My feet
Kelly-
are on the ground and I'm leaning against a bar stool.
Kelly's perching on a bar stool and I am standing. And, all of the desks in our office are set at standing height and they're not electronic. They don't go up and down. It's not a choice. We haven't made a choice for ourselves. Now, keep in mind, we have stools at all these desks. So if we have a day where we're tired or feeling lazy or whatever, and we just want to slump down in a stool a day, that is definitely an option. But what's not
lean against a stool
or lean against the stool. But we just set it up so that it's pretty easy to just walk up to our desk and, constantly change positions, which again is the goal. The goal isn't to stand like a statue for 8 hours. The goal is to be sitting, standing, perching, sitting on the ground, moving. What I like to say is if someone had like a little camera on me for my whole workday, I think people would be really interested to see how much I'm moving and changing positions. And that's ultimately the goal. So, that's one of the things we've done at work to create a more movement rich environment. We really encourage and do things like having walking, standing meetings. It turns out actually there's been some research that came out recently that people actually can listen better when they're not face to face, that the walking together actually helps people be able to listen and absorb information because and I think Zoom has really made this all the worse because when you're staring at your own face during these meetings, hour after hour, it's not great for the brain and not great for listening. So there's something really beautiful about walking next to someone and being able to actually engage in conversation in that way. So we encourage walking meetings. You'll see meetings where our whole staff is on a Zoom and, someone's hiking here and someone's walking there. And, we really encourage any type of meeting that can involve movement that doesn't require sitting still. Yes to that. So those are some of the simple things we do at work. We have a coffee shop that's maybe a half mile away. If we want to go get coffee, we walk to get coffee. So little decisions, micro decisions like that. And then in our home, if you look at our living room, as we said, we really try to encourage people sitting on the floor. So we've tried to make that comfortable for ourselves. We have these little mats that we can put in front of our couch to make it comfortable to sit. If you look around our living room, it's peppered with foam rollers, lacrosse balls, mobility tools, massage guns, like you name it, little ways in which, oh, wow, I found myself sitting on the floor and, oh, look, there's a foam roller. So I'm here on the floor. I may as well roll my calves.
Or I'm standing at a desk. I can engage in a little balance work or stand on a balance beam or a slack block or a balance device. I can be getting input in. But what we're really trying to do is avoid these static positions in any one shape. We worked with President Obama. He had a difficult time focusing and writing in any other place than a sitting desk, but it ended up giving him some discomfort. So we gave him a much more active chair. We gave him a place to put his foot, and we gave him strategies to manage and make sure that he was getting out of that, because those marathon bouts of sitting end up being what we're trying to limit. And ultimately, if we're just talking about metabolic usage, falling below 1.5 metabolic equivalents is how Harvard defines sedentary behavior, which is a sitting behavior. So any way that I can get more musculature and more tissue to work and get above that 1.5 metabolic equivalents, I end up staving off a lot of sort of the sedentary problems of sedentary physiology. But ultimately, as Juliet's saying, is that we are not designed to be in these static only postures, robot sitting, robot standing. We're designed to be in a lot more fidgeting movements. And that really led us to even how we ended up solving this problem at our local elementary school.
Yeah. And I what I want to just add to that is like, choose your own adventure. I hope people listening to this will sort of understand that creating a movement rich environment is like an ethos and a mindset, and it is okay to sit, but also choose little ways to move about your day that work for you, that fit into your life and your family's life. Because if you do that, it's going to stick, and it's going to stick for you and stick for your family. So, I'm giving examples of what we do, but man, there's 1,000 other ways that people can add movement and make their environments movement rich than what we've even said here today.
The vital sign inventory is to try to limit that total aggregate sitting to 6 hours. And that's in front of the TV, that's in your car, that's in all meetings. And what you see is very quickly, wow, I'm spending potentially a quarter or more of my day engaged in a single sedentary behavior with a single posture. And we certainly can buffer that for a while, but don't be surprised when all of a sudden you try to go run and you don't have any hip extension, or you feel stiff, or you have cankles at the end of the day.
So do we still have time to talk about stand-up kids?
Yeah, no, we have to. But my mistake was, I thought when I started standing up, like this should relieve all my pain. And I was like, wait, it hurts to stand. I didn't realize you had to build up to it. I also didn't realize that the goal, sort of what you were saying, Kelly, it's not to stand in a frozen position, but really that standing is, as you wrote in the book, a gateway to movement. So
That's
I
right.
start to feel like, oh, I'm getting tired, so I need to lift my foot, or I go
That's
into
right.
water.
Yes.
So I love that. And I just want to say a couple of things, and we're going to get into your nonprofit. But I think it was Kelly in the book, Juliet, who calculated that if you stand for 8 hours a day versus sitting motionless, you would burn an additional 100,000 calories a year, or the equivalent of running 38 marathons. So
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's a calculator that's available for free online. There's actually a childhood obesity researcher named Dr. James Levine who's done a lot of work around, standing desks for adults and has gone into the kids sphere as well. And he has a standing calculator on his website. You can plug in, how many hours you're at work and get that number, and it's kind of fun to see it. But
let me say that in his research work with elementary schools, the 4th and 5th grades, moving kids to standing dynamic workstations over the course of 2 years, they saw a decrease in body mass index of 1 to 2 points. And so over 2 years, that was per year, what we see was that the delta would suddenly be 6 percentages of BMI expressed over 2 years, because those kids were adding 1 or 2 body mass index points every year. And the kids who were moving more were losing. And so what we really start to see is, wow, early on, if we start to give kids more movement choice, we may be able to influence their physiology in really meaningful ways. In the blue zone, for example, the city of Dallas-Fort Worth increased some of their walking, changed some of their behaviors. They took a 1% body mass index off of their workforce, and it saved the company, the city, $250 million in healthcare. So what we really are talking about are these small changes, small hinges that open big, big doors.
Awesome. Well, I'll start by talking about stand-up kids a little bit. We were working, I think in 2014, we loved to volunteer at Field Day. We were like, this is our volunteer job. And
in 2010, we had done a Google talk about standing.
And Kelly had done his first Google talk about standing. And the reason that he did a talk about standing at work was that we were running a physical therapy clinic at the time. And we started to see all these sort of everyday athletes and, people who were like, weekend warriors and wanted to run a 5K on the weekend. And they would come into our physical therapy clinic with all these aches and pains. And what we would often learn is that these were the classic people who were doing 1 hour of exercise a day and then literally sitting for the remainder of their day. I mean, literally. And then wondering why, their joints and tissues didn't really quite work right, or why all of a sudden they had an injury. And we started making this connection to realizing, man, like people aren't moving enough. Like it's great you're exercising, but they're just not moving enough in the rest of their day. And that's not how the human body is supposed to work. And so fast forward a few years. And so we were really early on recommending people move to standing desks. And, at that time, it was almost impossible to buy a standing desk. They were all like $8,000. And so we were encouraging people to like stack up books and use Amazon boxes and DIY their standing desk, because, it was absurd to buy a standing desk at that point. But we're, in our day-to-day life, we're, espousing the greatness of moving more throughout your day and using a standing desk. And then meanwhile, we're like carting our own kids off to go sit all day at school. And we started to have this, a bit of sort of a disconnect. But what really hit home for us is we were working the sack race at our kids, it was elementary school kids. We were working the sack race, and we saw a couple important strange things. The first was that a lot of the kids couldn't get into the sack freely, which means they couldn't comfortably lift their knee to their chest and then, scoop the sack over one foot and then the other foot. So that already was a little concerning, because, little kids are supposed to be like plastic. Their bodies are supposed to be like plastic. And, and so that was a little concerning. And then they really also simultaneously were struggling like universally to actually do the jumping part of sack racing, which requires you to, put your hip into full extension and, is actually sort of a semi-athletic kind of, move, unlike a lot of the things in Field Day.
But not for a third grader.
But no, it shouldn't be for a third grader, right? And so, we started thinking, man, okay, why are these kids struggling? If third graders if we're already seeing a loss in range of motion in third graders, and the only difference is that they've gone from preschool, where it's mostly play-based, and if they sit, it's usually on the floor, to same in kindergarten. By first grade is really the first time they're starting to do like longer periods of just sitting down. And we thought, oh my God, like ding, 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 ding. Wait a second here. We're out here in the world telling adults don't sit so much, and then our own kids are sitting. So we actually approached our own elementary school principal, an amazing woman named Tracy Smith, who we are still friends with today. And I think is the reason why we have such deep and amazing respect for principals. And sort of frame what they do as the same as CEOs. And we approached the idea of converting a classroom to standing desks. And I really thought it was going to take a lot of convincing.
Juliet's an attorney, and she had to prepare.
I compiled all the research, and I was like ready to go. And she was open to the idea almost immediately. And what I learned from that right away is that teachers and principals are the ones on the front lines. You all are the ones managing kids who haven't moved enough, have been on devices too long, maybe haven't slept well, maybe haven't had any healthy meals recently. And teachers and principals are on the receiving end of kids whose, bodies may not be working to their full capacity. And, that often shows up in behavior challenges, right? So, we thought, man, maybe we can do this little intervention at our school. So we converted one classroom from sitting to standing. And then we converted
the kids could sit on the
more
floor,
classrooms.
and they had a fidget bar. So it was, and the desk was sized individually to the child.
And, it just basically every other teacher was like, wait, I want that. Right. Like we slowly, so slowly over a few years, we managed to convert the entire school. So kindergarten through 5th grade in a year to all standing, moving desks. And we really want to make it clear that, again, if you put a little camera on any of these classrooms, at no point are these kids standing for more than like 15 minutes. Any principal knows how an elementary school classroom rolls. Like nobody's lecturing for 3 hours straight and kids are standing there like statues, right? What you see in those classrooms is they're standing, they're fidgeting, they're moving to the floor, they're going inside and outside. And what you see is a really dynamic environment for kids. And so we decided to create a nonprofit out of this called Stand Up Kids. And we've been very slowly chipping away at trying to convert schools from sitting to standing or classrooms. And, we did get quite slowed down by the pandemic. I'll be honest. It was difficult for us since no one was going to school. But, we're just trying to make a little dent in hoping, we can at least at a minimum inspire teachers and principals who want to try to create a more movement rich environment for their students. To, have some resources and opportunities to understand that it can work and it's possible and that kids feel better, and it might actually make teachers' jobs just a little bit easier.
The problem was the pushback that we got from parents initially that the 5th graders were tired at the end of the day. Oh, and then we also had a little pushback from some teachers who were able to get through their entire curricula an entire month early because they were so effective. So they had to actually go out and create new lesson plans. And they were like, hey, this is additional work. But ultimately, when we even talked to some of the occupational therapists who were coming in and teaching handwriting skills, we saw that they saw a correlation between trunk strength and trunk control and being able to sort of stabilize at the trunk and then have better fine motor control skills. And they were thrilled that we were asking more motor recruitment, more motor development from the child's trunk. So, it's really interesting to see sort of where the perturbations went. We went into a Title I school locally that had real food insecurity. The kids felt safe. They could move around a little bit. They kids who had been up all night, scavenging for food with their families were suddenly awake. They could engage. It's really amazing that once people see it, it's actually not revolutionary at all. What we see is, this is how we can actually help the body function a little bit better, just thinking differently about the environment.
And just one thing I'll say is that there are many ways to create a dynamic classroom. We obviously are fans of the standing desk, and especially a standing desk with a fidget bar that creates as many movement opportunities as possible for kids. But there's so many ways to do it, and there's a lot of DIY ways to do it. And I also just think even for teachers and, principals who want to create more movement, again, I think part of it is exactly what you did when you read our book, is a bit of just a mentality shift and thinking, man, I need to be moving all day long. These kids in my classroom at my school need to be moving all day long. How can we create more opportunity to move more? One of those would be great standing desk, but there's also 1,000 other ways to do that. It just requires a real mentality shift that like kids and adults need to be moving more. And it turns out there's research to show that kids with ADHD or other learning challenges, they actually can't learn unless they're moving in motion. And I'm sure any teacher listening to this has seen this in real life. You see a kid who literally has to be moving and fidgeting and doing, and that's how they learn. So there's just so many benefits to movement. And, there's such a strong brain body connection. And it's so obvious when you're with kids in particular, because if they're not getting that brain body, input connection, the outcome of that is they don't feel good, and potentially there's behavior problems. And so again, it's about movement. There's a billion ways to do it, but we're just trying in our own little way to educate and help educators think a little bit more differently about how to create movement rich environments for kids and for themselves.
I love it. I'm sure they can problem solve and do that. And I like the study that you mentioned, that one study of standing desks showed that students, it helped improve their focus, it lowered disruption, and there was also an extra calorie expenditure, which helped with students who are overweight. So I love that. At a minimum, as educators, we can stop telling kids to stop fidgeting, because we can say the Starretts say that it's good to fidget, but maybe channel it in certain ways. So we have a new understanding. Mike always keeps these podcasts short, but you have too many good things. I'm not going to be able to do that, and I won't, but I'll just do one more practice. And that is, and it's connected to this one, and it's vital sign number 4, walk this way, with a steps per day assessment or test. So you have already talked a little bit about walking, but I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about walking, and then also clue us into the walking school bus, because that is something that many of our school leaders may not know about. So why walking, and what
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways to think about this is, and we've had some of our friends say, hey, how come you don't classify walking as exercise? That seems unfair. And what I want to say is, we think walking is actually more important. And that if you get a chance to go to the gym, that's heroic. If you like to run or do Pilates or yoga or lift weights, that's amazing. But we want you to start to think about walking in the same way you think about sleep, or same way you think about nutrition or sunshine or interpersonal connections. It's that important to the body. But what we find is that when we give people that benchmark of getting 8,000 steps, it's actually very achievable. As soon as we say 10 or 12 or 14, we start to see that adherence starts to drop off. Well, I don't have time for that. But one of the reasons we love this very much is that there are days when we don't have control, we don't have agency, and we certainly don't have time to get to the gym. But what we know is that if I've moved my body a whole bunch during the day, and steps is an easy way to do that, then suddenly what we realize is, hey, I'm getting enough physical input, and I'm maintaining load, and I'm loading my feet, and getting all the things that we've already talked about, so that I'm better prepared when I do have this sort of activity where I can engage in sport or play or free time or recreation. But the bottom line is that if you start to think about, hey, I've got to do that, it also means that I have put in the physical loading into my body required for my body to function optimally. And it allows me to say, hey, today isn't a waste. I got so crazy, but I still got in my 8,000 steps.
And I would just add that, again, I've been around schools enough to suspect that many principals are doing a massive amount of walking in the day.
A lot of kids are getting 2,000 to 3,000
yeah,
steps.
I don't see most principals, operating a job where they're just sitting at their desk for 8 hours a day. It's not at least how I've seen the principals of the schools my kids have gone to. They're in constant movement, and man, that should be celebrated. Like, that counts. Like, that's amazing. That like those principals who are up and out of their desk and interacting with kids and walking around schools all day long, like, that should be considered a win for health for every single principal. And it counts. Like, I want to really emphasize that, like, that counts towards your overall like health and fitness. And it's really important, that may be all you get in the day is the, 8 to 10,000 steps you got walking around your school, talking to kids and teachers and doing what a principal does. But I'll tell the story about the walking school bus a little bit. I'll start by saying, if I were a principal and there were no stakeholders involved, because I know there are many and it's always easier said than done, I would chain off all drop-off lanes and I would eliminate them from the universe. Now, I also am a realist and understand that, people get real married to certain things and it would be really difficult to do that. But, we, again, and, in part of our thinking about moving more, we started off with our daughter, Georgia, when she was in elementary school, just doing what everybody else does. You just pack your kid in the car and you drive into the drop-off lane. And we both felt like the drop-off lane was the worst experience. Like, You pull up, there's traffic, everybody feels stressed, people are in a rush. It was the worst way to leave our kids at school. You kind of shove them out the car and they sort of like roll out of the car and their backpack falls in the gutter. And, there's some parent there dragging them out of the gutter and shoving them towards school. And like, we found the whole experience to be like totally unpleasant. And then even worse was being the volunteer at the drop-off lane, where you're the one opening the door and you really get like an insight into people's mornings. And you're like, oh dear God, like it's not going well. And parents are yelling at kids. And man, the drop-off lane is like a horrible experience. I actually have a friend who's a therapist who works with families a lot. And apparently one of the biggest family stresses is the morning. Families come in reporting that they all are frazzled. They're, punting their kids out at the drop-off lane. They're pulling their hair out and they get to work. And it's like they just sit in their desk and have to take a deep breath because their morning has been like a marathon. And so I thought to myself, man, like, how can we make this a little bit easier on ourselves? And what I realized is if we just woke up 10 minutes earlier, we live about, what would you say, a mile from our elementary school? A mile and a quarter from our elementary school. And I thought, man, if we just set our alarms 10 minutes earlier, so we're not cutting massively into our sleep because we're obsessed with sleep, 10 minutes earlier, we can actually get up and we can make breakfast and we can walk with our kids to school. So we started this practice just as a family. And what Kelly and I realized is before we would leave at 7:45 and Kelly and I would have walked to and from school with the kids we'd be back by like 8:15. We had already walked 5,000 steps. We still had time to get to our office by 9. Because sometimes people would say to me, oh, it's nice you walk your kids to school, but I work. And I was like, well, actually I work and I get to my office by 9, but
there are two of us, which was lucky. So one of us had a time deadline. The other person could go. And what we recognize is not all families have that flexibility. So
I started doing some research and I realized someone had created this idea of a walking school bus. And I was like, genius, because, I think a lot of people would love to have their kid walk to school, but they don't feel they can't, they're a principal who has to be at work at 7:30.
And they don't feel comfortable letting their kid walk to school.
Don't feel comfortable letting their kid walk, especially little kids. So I made a bunch of flyers at the school and I said, we will be at this corner at 7:55 every single day of the school year, rain or shine. There will be us or another adult there to walk your child to school. And rain or shine being the key thing because, consistency is key. And we started doing that when our daughter Georgia was in 2nd grade. And it continued all through their elementary school. And there were some really amazing side benefits that happened. I mean, first of all, we just had this lovely time as a family to connect with our kids.
Child is better prepared.
Our kids got their sort of like wiggles and energy out. So they walked into class ready to learn, calm. We could actually enter the school through the back side of the school, through this lovely field. We didn't have to interact at all with the horrible experience that is the drop-off lane in the front of the school building. So it was like this very calm, relaxing experience, connection with our family. We had time to connect. But then the other unexpected thing is, people started coming and dropping off their kids, but then the parents started joining us. So first, it would just be this line of cars and kids would jump out and join us and walk with us. And then some of the parents were like, well, that actually looks cool. I think I'm going to do that. We had one parent who reported losing 10 pounds just walking to and from school with us.
In like 2 months.
We made, it was a real community builder. We made friends with a bunch of parents who had kids of different ages that we never would have met or had a chance to interact with. Our daughter went through a phase where she would pick flowers on the way to school and bring her teacher a bouquet of flowers every day. I mean, there were just so many things about it that were so lovely. Community building, connection, preparing our kids for school, starting the school day with the right mind frame. And what I learned in doing the research is that when we were kids in the 70s and 80s, something like 75% of kids walked or biked to school. Well, and now I think it's like 15%. And what hasn't changed, and especially in suburban areas, is that most kids live within 2 miles of their local elementary school, which I argue is a walkable or bikeable distance. And so that the environment hasn't changed. Most kids can still walk or bike to school. And again, I want to caveat that there are probably many principals who live in who are teaching in schools and in places where it wouldn't be safe to walk to school. And of course, I totally get that. But a lot of schools are safe to walk to. but what has changed is just that we've all been like, okay, well, what you do is drive your kids, and we've spent all this money building these drop-off lanes in front of our school and investing in that, and people just get in the habit of doing it, and it's really hard to switch. So man, just that simple act of creating community, getting kids to walk to school, getting some steps before they start school is just really magical.
If we took the hypothesis that families have different resources, different capacities, different structures, but during the course of the day, we could have massive input into the health and psychology and well-being of a child, of a student. Suddenly that means that, wow, that really opens up the windows for when and where, what kind of inputs we're giving. We know that schools sometimes are now giving 2 and sometimes 3 meals to their students. And that's the appropriate, because that means that school is the source of health and wellness information, source of movement and movement skills. And if a teacher can teach math to my daughter, she can also teach my daughter to squat. She can teach my daughter how to take care of her body and to walk and to sit on the floor. And so what we're really realizing is that we can sort of expand this opportunity to have a healthier population. And as Juliet and I have worked more and more across high-level sport, I'm in the NFL, but the problem is in colleges. Oh, I go to colleges, and the problem is the kids from high school. Oh, I go to kids in high school, and the problem is the kids from middle school. And so ultimately, all roads lead back to this, this development at these school-age children. And what we find is that there's a real opportunity for us to sort of engage our own selfish behaviors of, let's get more fruits and vegetables. Let's teach kids how to eat and to eat together. Let's go ahead and move our bodies more. And lo and behold, we think that that's a recipe for transformation of society. And especially when we bring people along with the ride, our fellow workers, our staff members, and we've given people clear research-backed scientific benchmarks that allow us to move forward. These aren't, pell-mell, willy-nilly, feel-good things. These are science, data-driven benchmarks around human physiology. And when we begin to then structure our day-to-day around meeting these benchmarks, lo and behold, the human body thrives more effectively.
Well, I would love to end on this heartwarming note and this optimistic note that just, something that started, a book you wrote, and I did it for individual personal reasons, but just the way you describe how it can help a whole community, and how our school leaders in the system can do these practices for themselves to feel better, live longer, be in less pain, but then they can help their teachers and their staff members with some, and then in turn they can help their students. So there's just many levels to read this book and to benefit from this book. So I thank you both for putting this book and your work into the world, and my deepest thanks for taking time out. I know how busy you are. Obviously, you've worked with President Obama. And just on a final note, just let people know, where can they find out more about you, your work? Where can they find all that about your nonprofit?
Sure. Yeah. The best place to find us is at builttomove.com. There's information about the book. We actually have a free 21-day Built to Move challenge. So anybody who feels like they need a little support, there's a lot of great video content and support, and it's free. So it's helpful to have the book, but you don't have to have the book to do the challenge.
But grab your friends, go to Built.
Grab your friends, go do the, sign up your friends to do the challenge with you. You can learn more about our work at standupkids.org. And I just want to say thank you for having us, and shout out to all the principals and teachers and educators listening to this, because, man, we've done enough close hand work in schools, and, obviously have school age kids ourselves, and we know how difficult it is and how many stakeholders and challenges there are. And so shout out to everyone listening to this. It's really a tough job.
Thank you, Kelly, Juliet. Appreciate your time, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.